we fundamentally believe that you need a story to string together a cogent and effective learning experience.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive value by focusing on their customer experience and culture together. I'm excited to chat today with Jeanine DeFalco and Travis Falstad. They're the co-founders of Mixta AI, and Jeanine is the CEO and Travis is the CTO. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having us.
I'm really looking forward to our chat. You guys are in a really interesting space around AI and simulation and learning. And I think the audience will find it really valuable. Just to get us rolling, um, you know, much of the conversation around AI today focuses on automation and efficiency. Um, but Mixed's approach to AI is different as a way to create more adaptive and human centered learning experiences. How do you think immersive AI is changing the relationship between people, work, and learning?
That's a great question. One of the problems that we kind of see in the space historically is an idea of like a transfer of learning, right? So we learn something in a classroom, maybe we learn something online, and then we have to actually demonstrate that in a context, like in a workplace or an environment. And so the way that we've been doing this kind of training and education is kind of siloed, right? And we're also doing it without data. We're also doing it without any kind of evidence that it's really effective. So we kind of use like resumes and degrees as proxies for knowledge, intelligence, competencies, capabilities. So with the emerging technology, AI, and then integrating the power of AI in emerging tech like AR, VR, like simulations, what we're able to do is we're able to kind of identify what are not just what people need to know, but how can they apply that knowledge in a context? And then how are we getting data that shows that they not just know a thing, but that they can do a thing? So it's really a very different way of thinking about training. I would just add it's almost harking back to an apprenticeship model, right? Like where you worked one on one with somebody to see, okay, did they get it? Did they not get it? But now we're able to kind of digitize this and go to scale with it.
This is a really powerful point, and what resonates with me is that you know this podcast is about culture and how it connects to customer and employee experience, and culture is about behavior and how things are done around here, and it's not just skills, but the mindsets and behaviors and relationship networks. Those are the four drivers of culture. And what you're highlighting is that you know you don't reinforce a culture just through training. In fact, you don't reinforce behavior just through training. If all you do is train, then you're really moving people's mindsets and you're not really reinforcing the behavior. You're creating a vehicle for reinforcing behavior beyond skills after classroom learning itself.
Right. Well, and so to get to not to nerd out a little bit, but like to nerd out a little bit on like what is learning, right? So I would
We
always
we
say to
we love nerding out on
oh
this
good.
podcast. Go for it. Go for it.
So so they're kind of like for me, they're as a cognitive psychologist by trade. Like I look at two different elements of learning. So I look at John Dewey, which is really this whole learning by doing, which everybody knows. Like it's we're learning as we're doing the thing. And then we also kind of look at Vygotsky. And so Vygotsky was really talking about learning as a social experience. So I would say to my students, how many of you learn to speak English alone in a closet? And the answer is nobody, right? Like we are learning in a context, but the context is with people and people are complicated, right? We have different prior knowledge. We're developmentally at different places in our lives. We have different kinds of experiences. We construct knowledge differently and we give evidence of what we know and what we can do depending upon what's in our environment. And so when we're talking about like a change management, changing a culture, changing how people do things, the abstraction of learning from a textbook can give us some, can be somewhat helpful. But we really want to just say, well, how does that pressure text pressure test in a context with other people in a specific environment. And so what we're doing at Mixta is we are again trying to uh, re- recreate in a digital environment the complexity of learning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. What does that mean from a technology standpoint, Travis? What do you have to do to kind of enable that kind of environment to occur in a way that people feel is not intimidating and is accessible to them?
That's a great question, Matthew. I think part of the obstacle that we see right now is leaders feel pressure to adopt these tools across their organization, and I think that there are a lot of highly public examples about leaders that didn't do that in an effective way. So Klarna, I think of that's a really large, widely known public example. But after Klarna's CEO eliminated 700 roles in place of an agentic approach to customer service, when he brought those people back or replaced those people and had to backtrack, his quote was that these tools lack empathy, nuance, and complex resolution. Those were the gaps. So I think that with any new technology, it's important, to follow a change management process that inspires a culture of innovation. And when management executes something kind of from the top down, that I think that's where you run into trouble. The 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 methods that I've seen be very effective are certainly hackathons, but also identifying, in product development, the squad model is very effective. But thinking in terms of larger squads across the organization where everybody can be part of some sort of AI innovation effort. That in that way, the CEO's not telling people, and there's so many examples. The CEO's not telling people you have to you know, you have to commit, X thousand lines of trash to our code repository in 30 days, or, you won't get your bonus, in favor of, instead of a top-down directive like that, inspiring people to work with a group of, cross-disciplinary team. So you might have a product person, a marketing person, an engineering person, and maybe somebody from legal or payroll who never sees the inside of a product squad. So bringing together a cross-disciplinary group and inspiring them to lead according to some company-wide objectives. That's the type of approach I've seen work.
Yeah, what you're highlighting is true not just with training and learning and simulation, but AI adoption in general, which is people embrace what they help create, and that you want a change to be not about the technology itself and adopting the features and functionality, but about how it changes their work, and how it helps them connect to the mission of the organization too. Um, as an example, I'll put a link up on the screen to my latest Substack with my partner Randall, which has a case example in it about change management for AI with an entertainment company we work with. And they had faced resistance to adopting AI in the workflow because they were approaching it as technology that they were rolling out that would reduce work, substantial reduction in the hours worked to create content and translations and marketing campaigns and all that. Um, and the people resisted it. It's natural. It's just an overwhelming new technology. They weren't involved enough in creating it. They didn't make it fun and engaging. They didn't focus on the learning aspects of it and the co-creation. And so we helped them create a change management playbook that made it more human to roll it out and more exciting and fun for people to be part of that. So people can check out the Substack to Winning Experience, and love to get their feedback on that. Just to connect this back to training. I first interacted with you guys when I was a partner of PwC, and we used your offering to kind of simulate difficult conversations. And you've evolved so much since then. Tell us a little bit more about your journey, where you're focused, where you guys are now, and where you see the biggest opportunity for Mixta.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think the core, let's see, the core like the foundation for what inspired us to make really dramatic change would be when we were awarded the NSF Phase 1. That, something that Tailspin, my previous company, never had the opportunity to do was 9 or 10 months of design. Yeah, I mean, Matthew, you spend a lot of time, talking about how important it is to be intentional about design. And at Tailspin, we always had the pressure. With the time at PwC, it's like, okay, we have great news. Take all the time you want to design, but we need this in 3 weeks. And there's 3 weeks of engineering. So at Mixta, we had the luxury of 9, 10 months of really, researching and focusing on design. Jeanine, was able to work with our learning scientists and our, behavioral specialists to build out the competency model, to build out the measurement framework that Jeanine just referenced. And we never had time to adequately perform that work. So I think that, we've had the opportunity or the luxury due to that funding to innovate in creating like a very, very deep and robust competency model. Now, what we're building on top of this solid foundation has actually been really easy. With the tools that are available today and the experts that we've gathered around us, the last, call it 6 months of product development and product iteration as we get into pilots has been kind of we're working hard, but it's been some of the most rewarding and easiest development work that I've ever done. Jeanine, has that been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, certainly having the NSF grant and being able to kind of focus, hit the ground running was really important to us. But I will also say that, collectively as a team, we have over 50 years of experience in the training and simulation space. And the good news is we have over 50 years of training experience. The bad news is we lived through 50 years of training, right? And so we kind of, in fact, when Travis and I actually first met, it was, gosh, I see this problem in this space. Here's some more problems I've lived through it. And it was a meeting of the minds of similar pain, right? So that we were able to very quickly say, this is what we think a good solution could be. Now let's build something and validate it, as opposed to spend time building something that either was not going to address the pain point of a customer or was just a problem that we thought was a problem, right? Not responding to what's happening in the space. So I think between those, that delta, the grant, the time, prior experience, and being an old person in the space, like we were able to kind of really hit the ground running. I would say, while we have heard a unique approach and a different lens in terms of how we can use AI and use these emerging tech to solve a real problem.
So here's what really resonated with me about your product from, a lot of the folks that I know are listening probably have a similar, I hope, similar view to this. Um, there's a lot that goes in today to, with customer experience, to listening to conversations and then giving feedback for a quality management cycle. That started really in the call center, and then now that so many conversations are visible, because you have Zoom meetings and WebEx meetings and so forth, and you have emails and you have chat, like there's so many more conversations that leave footprints,
Mhm.
um, that what started in the call center can extend more broadly. So people started a quality management cycle where they would record, either listen in on calls and ride along. That's the old fashioned way, right? Or you would, and you have people who are training and developing where they mentor people and buddy up. And then you started listening to the conversation and auditing, 10% of them. And now with AI, you can score every conversation and you can start giving feedback. Now, what's really fascinating with this is that you can do all those things, but also you don't have a safe space to practice and coach people outside of that without kind of periodically meeting with the coach and rehearsing. So it requires time commitments. It's harder to schedule. There's only so much time available. What I found really powerful about Mixta is the opportunity to leverage all of your deep insights into learning and organizational and individual psychology and best practices, um, and then be able to essentially create synthetic avatars or personas that align with your customers and actually practice and give very targeted and actionable feedback that can be tailored to the organization, but leverages a lot of deep IP that you have.
One of the things, having been both Travis and I have been in the classroom, we've both been instructors, we've both led live training, right? And being able to take what we've learned in terms of not just, the neuroscience of learning, how people learn, best practices, but take that classroom experience and say, then how do we build that into a space where we've got the assessment, where we've got the training? So, for example, in a classroom, I may want to have my students learn a thing. How am I going to evaluate them? Well, I have a rubric, right? And the rubric is going to be tied to evidence, it's going to be tied to sources, it's going to be a source of truth. So it's not just, I feel like you did a great job, but I can actually trace back. It can be explainable and transparent to say the reason you got this score, the reason you got this feedback is because we can trace it all the way back to a source of some kind of source of truth. And that's what I think is different. What I see in the space for using simulations is it's generally sets and reps. So you go in, you practice, but you don't know if you learned anything. You don't know if the learner learned anything. And then it's practice, but without actionable feedback or measurement, right? Because it does require it's we really look at it as a learning engineering methodology where we're saying, what do we know about how people think and learn? What are the constraints and affordances of the technology? Then how do we, in an iterative way, design and build something that's going to actually not just help the learner personalize that learning, right? To meet them where they're at, but then also surface that data up to instructors and to managers so that it's not become a black hole of experience. They can see, this is what they've done. And this is, and the idea is to be able to also say, I agree, I disagree with it, right? To have pure, real transparency on how that's the feedback and the measurement. But without personalizing it in the data, it's really hard to do without building it into the architecture.
Well, and this is so important for customer experience because when I explain to people what is the CX and culture connection, and what both my book and podcast are called the CX and culture connection. Well, what is the connection? It's the way your employees show up, because the peaks in the customer journey that are emotionally resonant, that are meaningful and memorable, that's the way the brain works. You remember things that are meaningful and memorable. The brain is a predicting machine based on meaning and memory, right? So, what makes it memorable? Well, the human interactions are often what make it memorable, which are the way you engage with employees. Well, how do you engineer? How do you get those experiences to occur more consistently? Well, you don't just design a digital experience or design a process or design a technology. You understand the behaviors you want. And then how do you evolve learning and development to deliver that? Well, training, whether before you show up at a job or your onboarding experience, is only a fraction of what can get you there because you forget a lot of that
Hmm.
very, very rapidly. So
Right.
you need to practice
Hmm.
and get feedback. So simulation is one tool in the toolkit to do that. I, I'm curious. Given your cognitive psychology and learning science background, what are some of the biggest misconceptions organizations have about how people actually learn, adapt, and change behavior?
Well, the first is the idea that somehow the brain is a computer, right? Like that's an old way of thinking. Like I tell you something, now you're going to remember it perfectly, and then you're going to iterate it. You're going to respond back in perfect aligned. It's going to be perfectly aligned with how I first introduced that knowledge, and that's just not true, right? So the brain co-constructs knowledge in an environment. We reconsolidate our understanding again based on prior experiences, The other thing too, and this is where I think we lean
By the way,
really.
what you're
Yeah,
describing is a strength, not a weakness, because
yeah,
it's what creates imagination and creativity.
100%. So our competencies, we focus on problem solving, teamwork, and leadership first, right? Just as because I said to the people I was working with, like, I believe there are 3 domain agnostic competencies. They thought I was crazy. I was like, no, really, I think there is. Any organization, you need those things, right? You have to be able to problem solve creatively. But going in terms of how the brain constructs knowledge, one of the things that we've leaned into from a design perspective is kind of the narrative, right? Because historically, we remember things episodically, right? Think about, Homer, Ulysses, all of the great bards, and these are things committed to memory that follow a structure. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood, those kinds of things. So we lean into the narrative of that, but the other part of it is that there is a very strong interactive effect between cognition and affect, feelings, right? And so I would say to my students who remembered what they had for breakfast, 45 days ago. Nobody, unless you eat the same thing for breakfast every day. I said, but tell me the first time your heart was broken. Tell me the first time you got into a car accident. We remember that stuff because what the brain is doing is it's codifying a very strong memory with these other kinds of heightened experiences. And so it's not to say that we want to stress people out. There was actually a psychologist in the 70s called Bruno Bettelheim who had a philosophy of fear, like people should learn through fear. It was an approach, right? But the idea is saying, like, how do we take narrative? How do we take engagement, motivation, and find a way to have people have an emotional connection, right? And so some of that could even just be why are you even learning the things that you're learning? Like, what is the value of it to you? Can you get behind that so you can get the knowledge to stick?
I love the connection to emotion. I love the connection to meaning. How do you infuse that into training?
When we're thinking about emotion, right? Like I one of the stories I always tell is when my youngest child was like in 5th grade, she came home, she goes, "Why am I studying algebra? I don't understand the point of this in my life," right? Like she just couldn't understand why. And I think a lot of people when they are exposed to new information is to say, how is this meaningful? Like, what am I going to use this for? What's the point of me even doing this? So the emotion part can be as simple as I'm motivating them, right? I'm inspiring them, I'm engaging them, I'm getting them to buy in, I'm trying to get them to see the importance of it. So for us on the platform, because we've built out psychologically complex human virtual agents, and what that means is that we, generally speaking, when we're talking to people, there's always some emotion involved in that exchange. It could be disdain, but it could be joy, it could be interest. And so, how are we constructing an environment that leans into evoking some emotional responses? Because again, we know that if there's some emotional hook in that experience, they're going to remember it better as opposed to just a pure abstraction.
If I can add to that, Matthew, both Jeanine and I, in our experience, have worked with designers to build simulations that hooked the learner right away with something emotional. I know at Tailspin, it was a delight. We had a module that started with a voice actor, shouting at the learner and reprimanding them, and the module was about feedback, but that was highly effective in getting their attention. People didn't expect that. And so what's been great about the way we've tried to proceduralize that with the platform we've built is we're using, in fact, some of those same designers to work to make sure that the system that we've built applies some of that same design philosophy, whether if you're building a module on leadership or how to replace somebody's brakes, when we add that the technical skills training, both will have a story, just because we fundamentally believe that you need a story to string together a cogent and effective learning experience. So we've tried to replicate those exact points that Jeanine is making in our platform.
One of the things that we do at JourneySpark is we create personas with customers. We'll co-create them with our clients that they can use to walk in the customer's shoes, to design experiences, to enhance the training, and so forth. So when you're creating a simulation that you have to train it to behave like those personas, what goes into making those personas engage authentically with the motion and with the right behavior that you'd expect from the persona with the right context for their product?
So my okay, do you want to answer, Janine? You want me
No,
to?
go ahead.
So Matthew, the key, what we have found is we start with our first assessment based on the persona that we write, that where we work with subject matter experts. We write a persona that informs the human virtual agent, which already has, a pretty robust contextual data model, but testing what gets us to something that really works is we build everything out and then we test it with our human QA team to go through a lot of well, it's a I guess a binomial distribution in that we can right out of the gate we can hit a 60% or 70% accuracy. It's something that feels accurate, but what we think brings it across the finish line is making it feel accurate in the edge cases, because every learner wants to say something that's out of character. Everybody seems to want to like kick the tires and try to break the simulation. And so, a big part of the realism is to address those edge cases to make it feel
Yeah.
emotionally accurate.
And one of the things that I strive for in training that connects CX to culture is identifying a critical few behaviors you want, like 3 to 10 behaviors that you want, and then think about, well, what are you employees doing to evoke these behaviors in your target personas? What are you doing to make them feel relaxed, supported, and optimistic? What are you doing to make them feel energized? Whatever the emotional motif is that aligns to your brand, that you're trying to drive behaviors. And then the training is a way of habit building to reinforce that in your culture. And you want to practice that both in real situations. Simulation is a great addition to that, both in training, after training, and in quiet moments where you can practice in a safe. I also find it's helpful to share stories and share. What I love about your product is the opportunity for people who know what good looks like to
Mm,
practice and then share good.
mhm,
Don't just share bad, right? No,
mhm,
share good. And like, it's like sharing a story. Hey,
mhm.
here's a recording of a practice session that I did. What do that you can practice this yourself. Plus, you can give people feedback. But so once you know what the emotions you are, how do you listen for that in the session to see whether the behavior of the learner is actually getting the emotion you want from the avatar?
That's a great question. I wanna back up just, one step, because I do think in terms of the training and the simulations, we do have the personas, right? They do have a background. What to me was really important is not just to represent what's good. What's actually really important is if I wanna train somebody is I need to show them what's bad, right? Because they need to be able to like, you only know light if you know dark, you only know good if you see bad, and so the we have strengths of characters, like maybe, their age, their experiences, and one of the things I've leaned on is to say, "And what is their flaw?" Right? And what is the limitation? What is the thing that somebody actually has to struggle against? Maybe they're very accommodating, they're very successful in business, but maybe they're successful in business because they can't make a decision, right? And so we're thinking in terms of these different, strengths and weaknesses of each character to make it, because what I'm looking for too, I think I speak for Travis too, we're looking for the psychological fidelity, not just a fidelitous environment rendering, but the psychological fidelity, and people are complicated. So the way that we look for that is, again, in from a psychology perspective, right now we're not putting probes in people's brains, so I can't know what your intentions are or what you're doing. I mean, we can put probes, but they're limited.
We
What I'm
aren't.
really looking for is I'm looking to operationalize behaviors, and I'm looking to operationalize language. So when they are saying this thing in this way, in this context, under these conditions, then I can infer a knowledge, a change of behavior, those other kinds of things. And that's what makes the system super dynamic, because it's not just a recitation of knowledge like A squared, B squared, right? It has to also include that contextual data of who they're talking to, what are they talking about, and in what situations. And then from a data mining perspective, then we also have other kinds of data that we're capturing in the system to look at things like, are they hesitating? You know, are they pausing? Are they repeating? Like, what are the other kinds of behaviors that then we can make inferences in terms of evidence of knowledge and competencies. So right now it's semantic, but the goal is to then also bring in things like, potentially at some point, not today, like the eye tracking, the kinesthetic, the
Of course.
spatial relationships, those kinds of things.
Neuralink.
What I want to come back to in a minute is because I want to play a clip about mastermind groups, is how important it is to create an approach that scales, that you can actually, like you hinted about this, make it practical, that you're not only creating some training and some learning, but it's actually driving real change, and it's something that is actually scaling change in the organization. So let's roll a quick minute reel about my mastermind groups, one of which, amplifying this CX and EX together, really focuses on how do you drive change in human behavior in an organization. Then we'll talk a little bit more about it on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. I'm really enjoying our conversation, Jeanine and Travis, about how do you actually leverage AI and learning to drive real change in an organization. How much customization do learning models require to be more effective? When you're putting them in how much is off the shelf versus how much are you customizing Mixta for clients?
Every simulation is not just customizable for an organization, but arguably you can do by learner, right? Because we have proceduralized the way to design our simulations by employing a learning taxonomy, kind of the structure of the rubrics. How are we importing source documents, right, to keep everything constrained so we don't have context drift? But that rapid iteration for a simulation we can build by learner. But really what we're also trying to determine is the learner, who they are, right? Because everyone's coming in with prior knowledge, everyone's coming in developmentally different. So the idea to be able to not have training that's just a one size fits all is super important to us as an organization. So everything's customizable to a certain extent. Certain things are static, like again, the rubrics, the structure, the taxonomies, the evidence, the XAPI telemetry that we've built into the platform to pull all that contextual data. There are things that are static and consistent, but the way someone responds, the dynamic interactions, those become super personalized, very individual. And what we're looking at is, again, how do we evaluate good?
If I can add to that, when I think about the customization and adapting modules, learning modules, traditionally it's a 3-month or a 6-month process to develop a module, and you have to make prioritization and trade-offs for how you spend. Do you create 3 versions or 5 versions, and what are the factors that you vary in those, and what our kind of audacious claim when we applied for the NSF grant was that we could do that work and deliver something that you could start testing within 5 minutes. And I knew when Jeanine and I agreed to do that, I was becoming the person that had irritated me for years, that would make ridiculous claims without a way to back it up yet. But we agreed that there was a way to do that. And the reality is what we're deploying for our pilot customers now are we create that first iteration. It takes 5 minutes. It's all the work we've talked about that has taken a couple of years now has resulted in proceduralizing all that stuff using our data model and our process to create something you can test in about 5 minutes. And then what's cool, okay, now you can take a couple days and make, if you need 5 or 10 versions that vary on very specific organizational focused items, you can make those changes intentionally within the authoring tool. So I just wanted to add the context of where we were and where we have arrived.
And you can certainly get a very quick answer and a very quick usable simulation. And if you want to put even 30 minutes in, I mean, we did this together where we took some of the personas that I'd done with a client, and in 30 minutes we were interacting with those personas. So, there's shades of the color, like 5 minutes or 5 days or if 30 minutes, like there's enormous value that can be created very quickly. The main important point here is that what used to take weeks or months can now be done in minutes or hours. Yeah.
Yes, but and to me, what's really important, like, so a lot of my work, a lot of my work in AI and AI standards is the ethical design and development of these systems. And in that, like, how are we using AI in an ethical way, which to me is kind of a not a nice to have, it's a must have, right? And for the ethics of using AI, it includes things like human flourishing. Is it helping people? How are we ensuring that there's human dignity? So how are we ensuring that the systems are not just gatekeepers, right? But that only to make it not a gatekeeper, it has to be explainable, has to be transparent, has to be traceable, right? All of those other things. And so the other elements we've built into the system is to be able to get under the hood, to look at JSON files, to be able to verify those documents, to take a look and say, I don't want to just have an output and then presume everything is correct, right? The minute we are promoting a misconception is the minute the system's not useful. It's not that you can't, but the idea is to say we're giving you all the tools to validate the process, the design, the evidence, the scoring, so that you're not just, again, black boxing it and have no idea how you got what you got. That's another really important part of the platform.
One of the exciting opportunities with agentic AI is systems that are um, dynamic and can increasingly coach, guide, and personalize the experience in real time. Um, how close do you think we are to AI systems acting more like adaptive mentors or performance coaches? So that would be an authentic and valuable experience versus, you're mining it after the fact so that it becomes a real time coach as opposed to something you do separately.
So if I can start with an answer for this, I would say, first of all, even deconstructing that question, if you think about, I mean, I don't think you even need to be that old to remember when the Turing test seemed like a faraway milestone. And the fact that now, no one thinks twice about having a conversation that feels human-like with an agent. So I think that, just thinking that that's really in the last 3 years. So that's trivial now. But what separates, real adaptive coaching just from a chatting with a persona is measurement as determined by whether it's a competency model or some other underlying uh, scaffolding or structure to produce consistent results.
What you're highlighting is it doesn't just summarize or transcribe the conversation. It understands the context relative to a scoring framework around what good looks like. And you're combining IP from human learning with human performance and human behavior in certain contexts, and you can tailor that with the client further. But the foundation is there that you can actually score the conversation against.
Exactly. And that's where you get an apples to apples comparison where, you within your organization or whether it's your instructors or managers who are driving the rubric and the scaffolding that sets how that works. But then, I mentioned the example earlier from Klarna. And I think that the CEO's comment that I mentioned, that the systems lack empathy, nuance, and complex resolution. That also informs this question of creating adaptive agents. And without those things, I don't believe that people can be effective. There are, as we all know, there are a lot of companies that have come to market with this kind of a promise. And the way Jeanine and I see the entire landscape broken down is really into four categories. There's where the kind of standard old the traditional model classroom, where you build and construct your course. There's the authoring tool. That's what Tailspin was. That's what other products are that have an authoring tool where you can then deploy things at scale. There's this area of chat of a GPT wrapper that they're incredibly powerful. And if you think about the hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone into foundational models, you could argue that the GPT wrappers are an incredible case that has been developed with hundreds of billions of dollars. But the problem is the context still collapses and you still are driving all of those conversations with, my grandmother's MySpace post from 15 years ago. And the reality is what we believe the next generation of company or product is where it's both the power of the foundational models, your own models, your own data, and then this complex scaffolding that we've developed.
What I love about this is, there are software as a system solutions out there that are leveraging the calls and the video meetings, but um, they're not really tuned as learning models. They're really summary and synthesis and or ways of scoring sentiment. It requires a lot of training the model and developing customization to get something valuable in place over a few months. I think what you provide is more than just a learning and simulation platform. It's actually a framework that can be used to kind of instill into the way you listen, and train people. Then the listening becomes a feedback mechanism. The training is a complement, so you'll perform better when you're on stage next.
Well
Yes.
said.
I think for us, for me, and I think for our whole company, Travis included, it really is rethinking what does it mean to learn, right? Like what is intelligence? What is competency? So if you don't, I think some people think knowledge is um is a noun. It's actually like it's like a verb, right? Like Dewey would say that it's dynamic, it's interactive, right? So I demonstrate what I know by what I'm doing. And so if I'm only doing multiple choice or if I'm only regurgitating back something that somebody told me, that's not really a great metric of intelligence. And so this idea of how are we preparing a workforce that is going to have to learn how to navigate with a lot of AI tools. It's a very different workforce, different skills, different competencies. They have to rapidly be reskilled. It's a different way of learning how to do your job. But the fundamental principles of what is knowledge, what is learning, what is competencies, that's the stuff that we're really trying to build into the platform. And I think that's important when you think about, how dynamic and complicated people are. What works with one employee is not necessarily going to work with somebody else. And all of the nuances that go into, we're social creatures and we're psychologically complex. I mean, and the good news is psychologists and educators will have jobs for a while because people are complicated. The difficulty is being able to prioritize and say, this is what we think is most important in our organization, these are the things that we want to be able to build for, and this is how we're going to identify this is good. And if they don't, it really should be less of, well, now you no longer have a job, but it's really trying to say you have someone with institutional knowledge. How do you then quickly get that person to the place they need to be? And that could be a promotion, right? Doesn't just have to be a new hire. And say, look, they're really good at speaking to people, but they suck at keeping a transcript or whatever it is, right? Let's give them that specialized training to enable them to do their work and not just say, oh, they can't do this one thing. We can't, it's too costly to bring them there. And then we're just going to get rid of
And
them.
this is so much more applicable than environments where you're recording people. There's so many situations where you want to drive behavior where there is no recording of the interaction. So simulation becomes even more valuable for training them. Um, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure you sparked a lot of ideas for me. I'm sure you have for the audience, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our collaboration. If folks want to get in touch with you, is the Mixta website or your LinkedIn? What's the best way for people to reach out?
So our website is www.mixta.ai. LinkedIn, they can contact either Travis or I, but our email is also on the website too. They can reach out to us directly.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's
Thank you.
great to be here. Bye.